Hello everyone, thank you so much for joining us today for this presentation. My name is Janssen and I will be talking to you about our first 100 days of bringing the OpenLEADR project to the Linux Foundation Energy. What we're going to cover today is some context about the origins of the project and some of our first steps with the ElaadNL Energy, what that looks like. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the initial community response that we got in those first few months, which have been really encouraging. And finally, I want to reflect on the combination of open standards and open source implementation of those standards. So let's get started. So from a project to a working implementation, how did this even come to be? I work for a foundation called ElaadNL. We were founded in 2009 by the major distribution system operators in the Netherlands in order to advance the charging infrastructure for electric vehicles. Now, this was in a time when there were hardly any electric vehicles on the road, and the Dutch DSOs decided to kickstart this revolution in the Netherlands, which has been very successful. ElaadNL has developed, and we still steward, an internationally used open standard called OCPP, the Open Charge Point Protocol, which is used around the world and is in many places is the standard of communication between the charging infrastructure and their management platforms. Lately, we've been exploring the applications of smart charging to optimize the energy use times and increase sustainability of the energy system. And we do that through projects, through standardization, and through collaboration with other companies in the field. So we looked at the OpenADR standard, which is a standard that allows rich information flow between utilities and energy users or aggregators or anybody taking part in the energy system. The communication ranges from simple signals in time to rich and semantic energy usage profiles. So you can be really simple, like a traffic light signal for green is go ahead, orange is the critical situation, and red is where you actually take steps to curtail energy demand, for example. All the way up to rich profiles where you can specify time slots where people can get more power or less power, or where energy prices may vary. So it's very complete as a protocol and as a standard. It has reporting and security features built right in, and which makes it even more complete. It's a very mature standard with a certification body and a governing alliance called the OpenADR Alliance. They've been great to work with as well. So back in 2018 and 2019, ElaadNL was involved in a project that was called the Global Grid Integration Project, where the DSO in the middle would communicate to different parties, like the charge point operator, or the OEM, or a consumer energy manager, and we would use OpenADR to relay energy-related information, and those parties would then control either vehicles or electric charging stations. So that was our first contact with OpenADR, and when we were doing this project, we were looking for a way to integrate OpenADR communications into our existing systems. So naturally, we took a look at what was available in the open source landscape. And there were a few implementations, one by EPRI and one by Voltron. They were, at the time, they were mostly a little older technology that was getting harder to run. It required some years-old versions of Linux, for example, or some older versions of some certain runtimes. Also, they mostly offered OpenADR integrated into a larger application, into a larger platform, or it offered OpenADR more as a demo application, which is great for first use, where you can see where you can graphically see what's going on. You can see the messages, you can see the events. So it's great for getting used to the protocol, and we use those very gratefully as well. But they proved a little difficult to integrate with your existing systems. And that's, at least for us, that was a reason to start development on our own implementation of it. So that's how what we internally called OpenADR was born. It filled this gap to have something that only did OpenADR and allowed a few API integration points into the rest of your system. And then you start wondering, well, there must be more companies that are in this position. They already have their existing systems. They have communication protocols all over the place, and they just wanted to add OpenADR to that interface. And we started wondering, could we maybe make this Python implementation available to other companies, and then we can collaborate on features with those other leading companies in the field, and thereby lowering the barrier to entry for this type of communication. And in the process, by offering an open source and easy to use implementation, we might be able to advance OpenADR as a standard as well. So that companies looking to do demand response would almost automatically end up with OpenADR because there were open source implementations available. Now, I'm happy to report that this is exactly what we were able to do, but also that we are not the only ones. There are, right now in 2021, there are multiple great open source implementations of OpenADR. There's a good Java version that I know of, and there are several others that all look really promising. So it's exciting to be part of this field. So with these ideas in mind, we started looking for some expertise on open source, because as an organization, ElaadNL we had experience with open protocols, of course, like OCPP, but we hadn't yet had any experience with open source software. So that's when we started taking our first steps with the Linux Foundation Energy to take it from an internal project into a public release. So the first things you do is you introduce yourself, and you can make a pitch on what your project can contribute to the world of open source energy related software. We were received enthusiastically, and we started collaborating on what we call the project charter, which is a document where we lay out the goals and scope of the project. Then of course you have to pick an open source license. There are many to choose from, but we settled on the Apache 2.0 license, which is more or less the de facto standard license for new projects at ElaadNL Energy, which suited our project very well, because we want to allow commercial use, we want to allow all kinds of integrations, and we want to encourage people to use it in any way they see fit, and that's what the Apache 2.0 license allows you to do. We also set out to create a new name and a new logo. So we moved from OpenADR to OpenLEADR to make it something that contains the Linux Foundation Energy in the name, the LE. And we created a logo, we created a page on the ElaadNL Energy website, a mailing list, etc. And then we were ready to tell the world about it at the ElaadNL Energy webinars, which we did at the end of 2020. And all of those were a pretty good success. We had a lot of viewers at those webinars. We had a lot of interaction after that, which I'll get to in a moment. And also we have a regular technical committee meeting, and we have a community mailing list, etc. So it's great to collaborate with LF to provide you with this infrastructure. There's also a few other things that LF provides, which is a license scan, where they look at all of the stuff that we are distributing and making sure that we abide by the correct license terms, which in our case was limited to just the distribution of the original XML schemas that define the protocol, as well as offer some guidance on open source best practices, like what do you put on your GitHub page, how do you deal with incoming feature requests, how do you deal with incoming security vulnerabilities, etc., which have all been really helpful and allows you to more or less take a look at the best practices in a checklist format and just chip away at them one at a time to make sure that your project is in great shape. So with the project released, with us being part of LF Energy, we are going from a first public release to really public collaboration. And this has been the most satisfying part of open sourcing OpenLEADR. At the moment, we're at almost 10,000 downloads, which still amazes me because it's still kind of a niche little project, which is still in an early stage, and we already have way over 9,000 people have downloaded this thing and are experimenting with it or using it. There's also been a ton of collaboration on GitHub which allows you to support other people's use cases that you might not have thought of. Other people who are building implementations have reached out to reach compatibility between the implementations. You'll learn about other people's deployment environments. We had someone deploying it to Heroku, for example, which is a popular environment, or deploying it on Windows systems. And it really allows you to learn about all of these things and to make it better and make it more suitable for running in a more diverse environment. What I also saw was that OpenLEADR was oftentimes the people's first real interaction with OpenADR. And that was encouraging to me too, because it shows that you're drawing in new people, new companies into the world of demand response. And that's been satisfying for everyone, I think. And it confirmed the sense that we were lowering the barrier to entry by providing an open source implementation. What was also really great is the sense of community that you get, the sense of building something together where people from around the world, from Australia, from South America, from the United States, from Europe, from Korea, from all over the world have opened GitHub issues or sent emails or contributed code in some instances. And you really feel like you're building something together and you're part of of something big, which is a very satisfying thing to do. Well, the results to date is we have had 23 updated versions that we have released since the launch. The collaboration has resulted in greatly improved compliance with the protocol as well as compatibility with other implementations. We've made it together. We've made it much easier to integrate with more diverse systems, like I mentioned. And we all learned something. From everybody's use case, you pick up something, you learn something, and that's been very satisfying for everyone. Conversely, some people who are using OpenLEADR for the first time, it might have been their first time using some of the newer Python APIs like async.io that we use a lot. And so it's been helpful for them as well. So all in all, it's been a very positive experience working with the community. These are mostly very hands-on, serious, capable people that are looking to use OpenADR and to advance the state of the art necessarily, because this is still a new field, so you're dealing with a lot of innovative companies, a lot of motivated developers, and this has been a great benefit. So in conclusion, I want to talk a little bit about the marriage between open standards and open source implementations of those standards. So can you go from public collaboration to a public responsibility over something? And I want to talk a little bit about the tensions between the two and also about how they can strengthen each other. So in open source, usually everyone can contribute, and you can just open an issue, you can contribute your code and get it approved usually. And if it doesn't get approved, you can simply make a copy, you can fork the project and start on your own. There's no central control required or even desired. With open standards, everyone can offer ideas, but when you start to fork a standard, you really defy the concept of having a standard in the first place. So you always need some form of central control and decision making. So what it really comes down to is that open source is about freedom and innovation. It moves fast. It moves as fast as the fastest person on the project, while open standards are focused on consensus. They move slow and deliberately. And there can be a small tension between those two. And that is still something that the LF Energy is also figuring out, and that we're figuring out with the LF Energy. How do we approach the project charter for a project like this? Do we wish to accept just any contribution from the community, even if it's outside the scope of the standard, for example? And I think we're making some progress on that, and I think this is great for these two communities, because I truly believe that there can be a happy marriage between them. So my advice there would be, when you're working in open source, just take the standard as is. You don't need to do all the work of defining every semicolon and bracket in the standard. You don't need to do all the work of defining the messages that are in there. You can focus on integration. You can focus on lowering the barrier to entry. You can do that by designing convenient APIs, but also by documentation, like cookbook-style recipes, and focus on bringing the standard to new and emerging platforms. That's how you keep the standard alive. Once a new programming framework pops up, you can build an implementation for that, so you can take the standard with you into more and more modern systems. Possibly people working on these implementations also get interested in participating in the Open Standard Working Group. And I think that the Open Standard WG can really benefit from these people, because those are very hands-on people who have worked with the standard day in and day out. And so to the open standards community, I would say, benefit from what the open source software community is providing you. They are providing you with real hands-on experience of using your protocol, and there's great value in there, as we at ELAAD also learned when developing the Open ChargePoint protocol. You can also learn about the newest applications for the protocol. OpenADR was designed, well, it started to be designed in the early 2000s. The latest version came out about 5 years ago, but there are still new and improved and more creative applications being invented for using OpenADR, and open source software can be a real catalyst for those, because it allows people to start working at a much higher level where they already have all of the messages implemented, and they can start working on that innovation, on that integration. So I truly believe if you play to your own strengths, like the open source community should play to the strengths of being able to move fast, to be able to bring diverse points of view into it. And the open standards community should focus on their strengths, which is their consensus building and their deliberativeness in providing everybody with a baseline that they can always depend on. And I think when these two meet in the middle, that can be a very, very happy marriage. And with that, I'd like to close. So I truly believe open source and open standards is a very positive combination. Thank you everyone for joining me for this presentation. You can find us on GitHub, on github.com/OpenLEADR. You can also find us at the website of the LF Energy, and you can reach me at the email address below. Thank you so much, everyone.